Okay, so we're back with Arena up and running. And hopefully you've had some success in getting Arena up and running on your computer. And it should look something like this. The only thing you might not have is this advanced process tab, but you should have this, the basic process, the reports, and then a navigation screen, but we don't really use that much. But the basic process is the one we use most. Advanced processes, I can show you how to add that. I might as well do that now, if I can remember where I found that. Okay, if we go to Tools, and then we go to Options, you'll see under Settings, Auto Attach Panels. So what you'll have in your panel when you start off will be basic processes.tpo. Just type in advanced processes.tpo. Make sure you capitalize the A, capitalize the P, don't leave a space. And then you should have that pop up. You may need to leave Arena and restart it to do that, but you'll wind up with both of these. So for the first couple of weeks, we're probably going to mess around mostly with these basic processes. We will get into this stuff, and the ones we use the most are match. We use some of the store, pick up, hold, some different processes that allow us to do some things with inventory management and transfer of parts between various processes that allow us to do some things. Match, and there's also a batch function, which I need to get plugged into here as well, which allows me to take, many times in manufacturing, you'll take and run a batch of parts. If you're running a machine, you may get a bin or a tray with 10 parts on it, and you're going to take those 10 parts and drill a hole in each one of the 10, then take that batch and move it on to the next operation. So there's several ways we've found to do that in Arena, and there's a couple modules here that we use to do that. So, but that's for down the road a little bit. So for today, let's just focus on the basic processes, and you can sort of follow what I'm clicking on, hopefully. So in here are some, again, some of the here's the batch module. There we go. Here's the some of the basic processes we use. Create, you're always going to use, and dispose, you're always going to use. Create's going to be on the left-hand side. Dispose will be over here on the right-hand side. And then in between that, you're going to have some series, and you may have multiples of these. You may have 3 or 4 create modules and 3 or 4 dispose modules. Doesn't need to be just one. If I've got 3 different entities, and again, entities are what drives everything in Arena. In the system, I'll have that number of create modules over here. If I've got just one path out of the system, I may have just one dispose module, but I may have a reject path. I may have, again, going to a manufacturing operation, I may have a dispose operation which says send to warehouse. And I may have another which says send, dispose of or reject parts, whatever. So anyway, between those two is where all this stuff's going to come into play. The process modules are the ones that we utilize. Okay, I had to take a quick pause there. I'm back. All right, so again, create, dispose. Process is where we do all of our, as you might anticipate, all of our processing. So whatever that might be. A process could be anything from evaluating a patient in an urgent care clinic, to drilling a hole in a part in a manufacturing operation, to performing a document check in a TSA station. All that falls into processes. Processes, what's associated with processes are resources, which you can see a tab for down here. There's none in there at this point, but we will add some. And a processing time, which most times, in what we're doing at least, because we have no hard data, so most times our processes are going to be driven by a statistical distribution in terms of processing time. Decide modules are, just as the name implies, a module to decide the direction that an entity is going to move. And that can be done based on some condition, based on some attribute of that entity, based on some variable within the system. Again, variables are system characteristics, attributes are entity characteristics. So I can evaluate any of those things. I can look at things like queues in forward-looking stations and make a decision on where I'm going to send an entity based on that. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Batch and separate, just as the name implies, I'll batch up my entities. I thought this was in the advanced process, but it's not, or maybe I moved it in there. Hopefully this shows up on your screen. But anyway, the batch process allows me to take a given number of entities, which I define, and put them into a batch. And then that batch leaves the batch process. I can process it in various steps, as many steps as I want to. And then ultimately, well, two things. I may not want to separate them. I may ship them as a batch. I may ship them in batches of 10 or 100, or if I'm processing eggs, a dozen. Or I may want to separate them and back into individual discrete entities. If I want to separate them, I use the separate module. So stuff's pretty intuitive, to be quite honest, on this stuff. Final two modules that we'll use, the assign module allows me to assign a value to some characteristic within the system. And that could be an attribute to an entity. It could be a system variable that I'm incrementing or that I'm adding a value to. Many times use that with, again, with an entity passing through there, and I assign some attribute to it, that it's been processed, or that some characteristic related to that individual entity. And then finally, the record module, we use that to record data, basically, about the process. There's a lot of data that gets recorded, sort of embedded in the system, but we can also record things that we have specific interest in. So those are my 8 modules that I'll use the majority of the time. Again, the advanced processes gives you a few more to use, and we'll use these as well. But we can do an awful lot just with the basic. And then the second part of this panel here is attributes, entities, queues, resources, variables, schedules, and set. And each of these will utilize attributes. Again, are entity-based things, entities, and as we get into this will make a lot more sense when we assign entities to things. Queues, again, are the queues in front of each process. The resources are the resources that we assign to each process, and then we assign the time that they're available. We can do that a number of different ways. One way is to establish a schedule, which as I get something going, this will make more sense. Variables, again, are system dynamic characteristics, which I can look at as well as make decisions on. And then sets are sets of, well, various things. Resources being one. I can have a set of, for example, stamping presses. If I've got a stamping operation, I might want to have a set of presses that would allow my queue to feed into 2 or more individual resources. That's a useful way to utilize that. So again, this is, I'm really just trying to give you an overview of this, and this is the project bar. This is where you'll spend a lot of your time. All this stuff up here is basic Windows kind of stuff for the most part. A few differences here with objects where you can connect processes or connect various modules together, and as we do that, you'll see that. So let me just start off. First thing again I'm going to take a create module. I just drag it, drop it on the screen. You can see when I do that, it pops up, gives me an entity name, entity type, what type of distribution I'm using on the arrival time, what the value is, what my units are, how many entities I'm arriving per arrival, my maximum arrivals. This is how we set, there's a couple of ways to do it, but one of the ways to set how long you want your simulation to run for. Again, we want to try to get to a place where we're statistically valid. We've run enough to be statistically valid, and again, the reports will tell you that. At this point, it's set to infinite, so it'll run forever until my computer blows up. But normally you would set that to something. So I can either change these things by doing it here. Okay, I can change any of these things by changing their names, by how I want my distribution to be. Again, I can use a schedule, which is very useful. So that ties it into time of day, day of the week, however I want to set that up. I can set it up as a constant if I know it's a constant coming in, or I can use an expression of some sort, which once you set expression, you need to come over here and set this. So what you would do, for example, and this ties in with the statistics lecture I did last week. Say I'm using a triangular distribution here. I would click on this, and then change the min mode and max to whatever values I find to be most appropriate. Okay, but let me just change this back for now. Change this back to random. And then finally, hours, I can change this to minutes or seconds. Most times you're going to use minutes. Entities per arrival. In this case, we're going to just leave that as 1. This will change. Rather than leave it as infinite, let's change that to 2,000, let's just say. So in other words, 2,000 entities will come into the system. First creation, we'll leave that at 0 for now. We don't really care about that. So I can change that stuff down here, or I can double left click, and change them up here. You can see these have all been changed to whatever I set them up for down here, so it's pretty handy. I can change my entity type. You might want to make decisions based on entity type. You could make that a type of part or a family of parts. You can do a lot of different things with that. Typically, create, you would we'll just make that machine part rather than create. Okay, so that's my process module. You can see it changed down here as well to machine part. So these two, it's sort of useful. Some things are easier to do down here. Some things are easier to do directly from the module. Okay, so let's just do something pretty simple. We'll do a couple processes. So again, I'll drag this, set this up, and I got it lined up pretty good. So I got a nice connection there. It doesn't really matter. It'll jog this if these aren't in line. You can do some stuff with snap to grid and grids. You can show a grid if you like, if that's helpful. I'm not super concerned. If you were doing this for a presentation, you might be a little bit more concerned about how well your stuff lines up. For what we're doing here, it doesn't really matter too much. Okay, so if I look at my process module, once again, I've got the same sort of setup here. That's the last thing I dropped in. And so it shows up down here. I can change it up here, or I can change it down there. And we'll just call this mill part. And we'll leave that as a standard. We can do submodels, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but for now, just leave it as a standard. I talked about how we want to treat our resource, and what seems to be the most useful. In fact, we really didn't find too many applications where we used anything other than this. Seize, delay, release just seems to work best at least for the type of models that we put together. So I'll leave that on seize, delay, release. It's asking me for my resources. It's also asking me for a priority. Now I'm just going to leave that as medium at this point, but I can set that as a high priority. I can set that to a value, and then make decisions based on that. Okay, but for now we'll just leave that as medium. I'm going to add a resource. Again, the type is going to be resource. It's not going to be set. Okay, here's an example of sets. I could have a set of resources. Let's just leave it as a resource. And I'm going to change this. The reason I click that is it'll show you existing resources that you have. You want to make sure you pick something that's not in there. So I'm just going to call this milling machine. And we'll leave that at 1, and we'll click OK. You'll see down here somewhere it should show me my, nope, it doesn't. It would have been resources. Let me finish this. Let me leave that, and I'll go to resources. And you can see now I have milling machine under my resources. Okay. Let me go back to this. And this is set to hours. I don't want that to be hours. I want that to be minutes. One thing which you'll see happens quite often is you'll wind up with hours in one place and minutes in another. And your simulation, when you click run, it'll run for about a second and a half and shut itself down. So just make sure you get that set up. And I'm going to leave that at triangular. Again, that's a triangular distribution. My most likely being a minute, my minimum being a half a minute, my max being a minute and a half. We use triangular a lot just because it's really, really easy to understand. Some of the other statistical distributions we talked about last time, it's pretty easy to change the shape of those to something that maybe is not what you're really looking for. So at least at the onset, where we want to get something that's going to run, something that we can understand, and something that we can easily work with, a lot of times we'll start off with a triangular distribution, and then at times go to a different one from there. So again, you've got similar to my create module, I've got a constant, so I can pick a constant number. I can use a normal distribution, triangular, uniform, or set sum expression. Very much similar to what we had over here with the create module. And this is something else too, is we look at manufacturing, and one of the things we're going to do in related to this course is we're going to do a value stream map, which basically is a flow chart of a process. And what you look at there is what is value added. In other words, what's adding value to the product, what's non-value added. So an example would be a value added process would be I milled the part. It's worth more after I'm done than it was when I started, right? I've added value, I've input labor into a raw material, and what I have is worth more than it was when I started. On the other hand, non-value added would be something that didn't add value. Okay, an example would be a transfer. If I take a part and I move it from one machine to the other, it's not worth anymore. I haven't increased its value, right? Even things like inspection. If I inspect the part, in the customer's eyes, their expectation is to get a quality product. So they don't want to pay, they don't consider it to be a value-added operation to inspect it. I haven't increased its value. We're just going to leave this for value-added right now. We may get into this. One of the things I'd like you all to do is let me know what you're interested in. You're a bunch of different majors. I'm not sure what type of things you would like to simulate. If we want to get heavy into manufacturing, we'll start to use some of this stuff and be able to look at value-added, non-value-added processes and make various decisions based on it. But for now, let's just leave it like that. Okay. So you can see, for some reason, I have this little line up here that just appeared out of nowhere. And what that is that's my queue. And as I start to make parts, and parts start to come out of the machine part, create module, they'll queue up here if the resources are occupied. So I'm just going to go back here and change this. Right now, well, I could leave it and I can show you what would happen. Right now I've got a random exponential arrival time of 1 minute and a processing time of between 1/2 minute and 1.5 minutes. So as that runs, you'll see what happens here. Let's just do this real quick. And let's throw in a decide module just so we have a couple things going on here. Didn't get my lined up so well there. So decide module, again, number of ways to look at this. Simplest way, and we're going to just say inspect milled part. Simplest way is to just do two-way by chance. So if I click two-way by chance and I set a % true, in this case 50%, what that will do is 50%, you know, if you can see that real well, but this says true, this says false. If I set that for 50%, 50% come out the true path, 50% come out the false path. I'm going to set it for 90, maybe 95. So now 95% of the parts will come out that true path, 5% will come out the false path. For now, we'll leave it like that, but what we'll use quite often is two-way or n-way by condition. So I can set up multiple paths. It doesn't just need to be two. I could have, I'm not sure what the max is. We've done 4, 5, 6 paths out of a decide module in various simulations, but I'm not sure what the actual limit is. But you can do that by chance or you can do that by condition. So let's just click this for a second. So what this is saying is two-way by condition, and it's an if-then kind of thing. If an entity, and I can pick a number of things. I can pick a variable, I can pick an attribute, I can pick an array, an expression, name this, named entity 1, equals some value, it'll effectively be true. Okay, so we'll come back to that. But let's for now just leave that at 95% true. And what we can do is we could put a rework path in there, but let's just make this simple for now. Otherwise we're going to get too complicated. So let's just put our dispose module in, connect that up, and we'll put another dispose module in, and to that we'll connect this. So to do that, I go up to Object, I go to, whoops, you hear that a lot. I go to Connect, click that, lines it up for me. So 5% of my parts go that way, 95% go that way. Let's just put in here ship to inventory. And let's make this one reject. Okay. So there's our model. Pretty simple. We're going to machine a part, and we're going to bring a part into the system. We're going to mill the part. We're going to inspect that part. 95% of them are going to be good. They'll go to inventory. 5% will be bad. They'll go to reject. Okay. So what I want to do first off is save that. So let me save as, and I'm going to go to, and you can set this up obviously to save wherever you like. And we'll save it. I'm just going to go ahead and I can, what I can do is go to options again and see what my run speed is. Okay, it's very fast. So I can, in this case, there's not a whole lot to see, to be honest, right? You've got parts coming through, you know, there's not a lot to look at. In some cases, you might want to sort of look at, if you've got a lot of branches and things, you might want to look at and see how something's functioning. So you'll slow this way down so you can actually see the entities going across. But in this case, we don't really care about that. Now what I can do too is just to make this a little interesting, I'll put something in there. I'll put this, instead of picture report, I'm going to change this to widget. And I can change it to anything that's in there as well. Okay, let's see if this works. Let me hit save again. Let me go over here and hit run. Whoops. And you can see my widgets. You can see my queue building up, building up, building up. And this should run 2,000 replications. Looks like it's keeping up, but remember you got a statistical distribution here. This could easily go into shutdown mode. It looks like it is keeping up though. I'm not building a queue here. And you can see the numbers that are leaving out of the inspection routine. You can see the parts that are going to inventory and the parts that are going to reject. Looks like my queue's building here a little bit. It may hit a point where it shuts down if the queue gets too big. I don't know if you noticed when you started up your software, it said, in fact it says up here, commercial use prohibited. So we're all running academic versions of this. Mine is basically the same as yours. In fact, it is a student version. They call it the professor thing, but it's really the same thing. You're limited to 150 entities in the system at any point in time. You can see this is sort of running away now. It may run away to the point where we exceed that and it'll shut the system down. You can see we're up 1,200 or so maybe. I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit. That's a bit better. So it's keeping pretty steady. The red is what's in the system. If I had multiple processes with multiple queues, then you can see we're getting close to 2,000, 1,700. And that's it. It got to 2,000 and cleared it. Asks me, do I want to see the results? I say, yep. So the first one really is just the number out of the system, which is your category overview. So that's 2,000. Doesn't give me a whole lot of information. But here's where I get some good information. Here I've got, this is where your correlation part comes in. When it comes up and says correlated, it means it's run sufficiently to get a statistically valid answer. And you can sort of see that really, that queue went up and down, up and down, and up and down, but didn't really ever run away. And that's a good thing. So various times that I'm looking at, my value added time, which was basically all my time, because I only have one process and I called it value added. You can see a min of 0.008, and this I bet you is in hours. I gotta see where that is set. I'm sure it is, because my times were all set in minutes. I've got to check one of the settings up here. I'm sure is hours, but in any event, I'm going to go from a min of 0.008 hours to a max of 0.024 hours. So a factor of 3 difference between the min and the max, right? Which makes sense because I've got a triangular distribution with a least value of 0.5 and a maximum value of 1.5, exactly 3. So that sort of makes sense. What gets a little goofy here is the wait time, and that's because that queue built and then dropped. So it went, my maximum total time of an entity, 1.36, my minimum time, 0.01. That's a huge variation, right? 1.36 hours versus 0.01 hours, okay? Where my processing time was by a factor of 3, this is by a factor of 100 or so, right? So big difference, and that's where the whole thing with the statistical distributions and the queues come into play. So just to sort of point that out. When we hit 2000, we had 81 in inventory in the WIP. Let me get to page 2 on this. See what else we've got here. So you go up here to this screen. You get used to navigating around this thing after a while. Waiting time, again, that's what drove the bus as far as the time, right? My processing time was only up to whatever it was, 0.024, right? But my min waiting time was 0, my max was 1.35 hours. So massive number. May be okay for a manufacturing operation, may not matter, as long as I have room to deal with the queue. If this was an urgent care, probably not gonna fly, right? Probably not gonna fly. Maximum number I had in the queue. Again, this is some good information. I only had the one queue, so it's pretty straightforward. My average, 37, but my max was 80. And at times I had 0. And again, that's correlated as well. Some of the usage numbers here, in terms of the parts that went through. These, for whatever reason, did not correlate. Probably want to run it 3,000 times and see what you get. Entities, again, we only had one entity in the system. Value added time. Total time going through the system. We didn't set anything for frequencies. Processes, I don't think we'll have anything either. Queues, we should have some data. Wait time, number waiting. Resource utilization, we should have a little bit on that. So resource utilization was pretty good, right? 0.99, that's about as good as you're going to get. Transfers, we didn't have anything. We didn't specify any variables, and we didn't have any tank statistics. So that's something else we can set later on. Okay, so that is, and then when I'm done, you got to make sure to go back up to run and hit end, okay? I can't tell you how many times I've gone and I see this here and I'm trying to do some editing or something, I don't realize it didn't end. It doesn't end automatically. You have to go up and click end right here. And then you can run it over again. You could make a change if you wanted to and run it over. Certainly if I made this number bigger, or I made this distribution smaller, so maybe this was 0.2, 0.5, 0.7, I'd probably end up with nothing in the queue. Okay. So that's a pretty straightforward introduction to Arena. I hope this made sense for you. Couple other things you can do. You can go to, they have a symbol factory. You can, to a degree. I'm not sure why that didn't pop up. No, that's why. It's on the other screen. Let me see if I can get this over there so you can see this. There we go. So there is a way that you can tie this up a little bit. You can change colors of it if it's got a part in it. Limited value, but still you could do it. But you could go in and pick a machining operation, Let me drop this down a little bit. Here, let me do this. Let me just maximize this for 1 second here. And I could pick a machining center. These are turning centers. That's the vertical machining center. Why don't I pick that? That's a good one. And I'll go ahead and copy that. And then I can take that and let me just minimize this for a second. I'll move this back over to my other screen. And I can drop this into place. And, oops. Put it up there. So it gives you a little bit of visual, very limited, you know, graphics. But you know, if you were making a presentation to you know, a group of colleagues or whatever, you might want to put a milling machine up here because that's what you're doing. You might want to put a CMM or an inspection machine here because that's what you're doing. You might want to put a forklift here because that's what you're doing. So it adds a little bit of value to it. And that's just, again, that was over here in Tools and Arena Symbol Factory. You can drop those in there. So, okay, so that's again, a super brief introduction. I hope everybody was up to speed with this and understood what I was saying. I guess the advantage of this with the video is you can go back and listen again. Hopefully it makes sense the second time. And if it doesn't, I'm new to teaching online. If anybody gets jammed up or doesn't understand something or needs some extra help, I'm certainly available on campus or via phone or email or whatever. So don't if you get lost, don't hesitate to reach out and contact me in some way. So what I'd like you to do for next time, and I'll need you to email it to me prior to Wednesday evening, okay? So I can, I'll present whatever you send. If you're not in class, if you're in class, you can obviously present. But if you're not in the class, I'll present it. But put together a simple simulation, something similar to what I did here. Maybe something that is in your interest area, or if you're employed, maybe something at your company that's not proprietary or confidential. Put together a simple simulation. Obviously, you'll have a create and a dispose, at least one of each. Put a decide module in. Put a couple process modules in. Maybe put a rework module in where you tie this back into the, basically what you would do with that would be to tie that reject line back into the front of milled part. And then we'll do some stuff, putting a counter in so we cycle it a minimum number of times. But get something together that shows me that at least you've got Arena running on your computer and that you can get it up and going, and that at least you can put together a fairly straightforward simulation. So, and please email me that again prior to Wednesday so we can talk about it in class. Next Wednesday the plan is to be in class again. This was something came up, I had to just do this one online again, but plan is to be back in class next week. So that's it. Again, if you're stuck or if you feel like you're not understanding where I'm going with this, please reach out and contact me. So that's it. Have a good week.